Imagine finding a lost wallet filled with cash. You could keep it and solve many of your problems, but you choose to return it. What do you think would happen next? Stay until the end of this video to discover how one simple decision transformed a man's life forever and why making the right choice is so important, even when no one is watching. It was just another cold morning on the bustling streets of downtown Seattle when Eric stumbled upon a wallet, abandoned and unnoticed in the alley. Shivering in his worn coat, he turned it over in his hands, inspecting the thin leather with a touch of envy. Inside were credit cards, a driver's license, and a considerable amount of cash. "This could get me through the winter," he murmured to himself, glancing around. But then he sighed, studying the photo on the ID. A woman with sharp eyes and a professional smile. "Guess this belongs to someone who'll be missing it." His voice trailed off as he decided to look for the owner. The biting cold seeped through Eric's thin coat as he trudged through downtown Seattle, his steps hesitant as he scanned the pavement for anything useful. The harsh streets of Seattle had become his reluctant home over the past year, and he had learned to spot items others left behind, small things that might help him survive another day. However, today something unusual caught his eye, a black leather wallet lying against a forgotten corner of the alley. Bending down, he picked it up, his fingers numb against the fine leather. He knew it wasn't an ordinary wallet, not something from another lost soul on the streets. It was pristine, its quality unmistakable. Hesitating a moment, he glanced around and then opened it. Inside were multiple credit cards, a driver's license, and a neatly folded bundle of cash, more than he'd seen in months. His stomach tightened as he counted the bills, realizing it was enough to buy him food and shelter for a week, maybe more. "I can't believe my luck," he murmured, shoving his hands into his pockets to warm them. For a fleeting moment, he considered slipping the wallet under his coat and walking away. No one would know, and he desperately needed a break. But as he glanced back at the driver's license, he stopped, fixating on the woman's photo, a sharp, determined face with kind eyes, probably in her mid-30s. The name read Sarah Collins. He sighed, pulling out her ID to study it more closely. Sarah Collins, Washington State, he mumbled to himself. She looked like someone who had everything together, probably too busy to notice. Trying to push the guilt aside, he walked a few steps, but a pang of conscience made him stop. He imagined Sarah retracing her steps, panicked, realizing her wallet was gone. What if she had children? A family depending on her? The thoughts settled uncomfortably in his mind, and with a heavy sigh, he turned back toward the busy street. A plan began to take shape. He'd find a police officer or a nearby business, someone he could trust to hand the wallet over. It was the right thing to do, no matter how badly he needed the money. Adjusting his torn scarf, Eric clutched the wallet tightly in his hand, moving with purpose and determined to find a way to return it, even if it meant walking away from the only comfort he could have had for the coming days. With each step, the cold nipped at him, but he pushed forward, his mind set. Somewhere deep down, despite his rough life on the streets, he knew he couldn't keep what wasn't his. Eric spotted a police officer standing near the corner of a bustling cafe, her gaze sharp and vigilant as she observed the morning crowd. Gathering his nerve, he approached cautiously, holding the wallet in his hands like a delicate offering. "Excuse me, officer," he said in a low voice, but she turned immediately, noticing the wallet. With a kind nod, she asked, "Is that yours, sir?" He shook his head, his words stumbling. "No, I found it in the alley. It belongs to someone named Sarah Collins. Thought someone could return it." The officer examined the wallet, glancing up at him with a blend of surprise and curiosity. "That's very honest of you. Not everyone would go out of their way like this," she said, gesturing for him to follow her into the cafe, explaining that they could wait inside for Sarah, who had already reported the wallet missing. When they stepped inside, the warm air hit Eric like a gentle wave, and he couldn't help but savor the rare comfort. Minutes later, the door swung open, and in walked Sarah, her heels clicking against the floor. She looked around, her gaze settling first on the officer, then shifting toward Eric. Her eyes narrowed slightly, assessing him, but her face softened when she saw the wallet in his hands. "Miss Collins," the officer called, motioning her over. "This gentleman found your wallet and wanted to make sure it got back to you." Sarah approached, her sharp gaze flickering between the officer and Eric, clearly surprised. "You found it?" she asked, her voice laden with disbelief as she looked at him closely. "Thank you. I honestly didn't expect to see it again." Eric felt a flush of warmth mixed with embarrassment as she took the wallet, checking the contents quickly. After a pause, she looked back at him, her expression softening. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a few crisp bills, extending them toward him. But Eric's eyes shifted to the floor. "It's not necessary, ma'am," he replied quietly. "I just thought it was the right thing to do." Sarah paused, her hand hovering, surprise evident on her face. This was unexpected. Her experience with people told her he might be desperate for whatever he could get. She studied him, noting the deep lines etched into his face, the weariness in his eyes, and the battered coat hanging off his thin frame. "Please take it," she insisted gently. "Consider it a thank you. I can see you could use a little help." Eric hesitated, torn between pride and need. He finally accepted the bills, murmuring his thanks. "I'll use it wisely, I promise," he assured her, slipping the money into his pocket. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" she asked abruptly, surprising herself. The words had come out before she could stop them, and she quickly looked away, a hint of discomfort crossing her features. Eric shook his head, his expression resigned. "Not really, but I manage," he replied with a slight shrug, the weight of his circumstances evident. Sarah felt an unexpected pang of sympathy, but it was quickly suppressed by a more practical voice inside her, reminding her to keep her guard up. "Well, if there's anything else I can do, let the officer know," she nodded at him, her tone formal as if to maintain distance. With a polite smile, she turned and walked back toward the door. Eric watched her leave, clutching the small stack of bills, both grateful and hollowed by the exchange. He knew better than to expect anything more from people like her. Successful, busy, far removed from the life he knew. Yet, as he walked back out into the cold, a small sense of dignity clung to him, a reminder that he had done something worthwhile. Unknown to him, Sarah paused outside, lingering by the door, watching him shuffle away through the glass. She didn't know why, but something about the encounter stayed with her, a quiet discomfort mingling with curiosity as she slipped the wallet back into her purse. As Sarah walked briskly down the busy Seattle street, her mind lingered on the encounter with Eric, the image of his hesitant, grateful face as he clutched the few bills she'd offered gnawing at her. She'd meant it as a gesture, something small to clear her conscience, yet the way he looked at her, a mix of dignity and resignation, left her feeling oddly unsettled. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of Eric didn't fade. On a chilly, rain-drenched morning, Sarah found herself searching her usual coffee spot, half hoping and half dreading to see him. When she didn't, she asked herself why she even cared. Eric was just one of many who struggled in the city, and she had her own pressures to juggle. But something about his selfless decision stayed with her, tugging at her normally guarded heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that she owed him more than a few bills. One night, sitting alone in her sleek, modern apartment, an idea began to take shape. It was ridiculous, impulsive even, but the thought refused to leave her. She started researching local charities and found herself dialing numbers, setting up inquiries. Soon, she had a plan, one she'd never share with anyone, not even Eric. A month later, Eric sat huddled beneath an awning, watching raindrops splash into murky puddles on the sidewalk. It had been another hard week, and with winter approaching, his spirits were dwindling. As he adjusted his ragged scarf, memories drifted back to him unbidden. Once, he had had a different life, a modest apartment, a steady job as a mechanic, even a small family he could come home to. But those days were long gone, erased by a cruel sequence of events. He remembered how he'd lost his wife, the love of his life, to an unexpected illness, and in the aftermath, grief had consumed him. Struggling to cope, he turned to the bottle, and soon enough, his job and his home slipped through his fingers. The streets became his refuge, a place where people didn't expect anything from him and where eventually he expected nothing from them. Lost in this haze of reflection, he noticed a young man approaching, well-dressed and holding a large paper bag. Eric tensed instinctively, preparing for rejection or, worse, a pitying look. But the young man simply handed him the bag, offering a respectful nod before walking away. Curious and slightly bewildered, Eric opened the bag to find a warm meal and a small note tucked inside. His hands trembled as he pulled out the card and read, "You are seen and you are valued." There was no name, no clue as to who had sent it, but the gesture lifted him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Weeks went by, and every so often, Eric found himself the recipient of a similar package, sometimes a meal, sometimes warm clothes, always accompanied by the same simple note. The kindness felt almost surreal, and he often found himself waiting, hoping for the next delivery. These quiet acts of compassion reminded him that maybe, despite everything, he hadn't been forgotten by the world. Unknown to him, Sarah had been carefully coordinating these small gestures from the anonymity of her office. She made sure her assistants handled everything discreetly, insisting it remain untraceable to her. At first, it had been difficult to justify spending so much on one man she barely knew, but each time she saw the reports confirming that Eric had received her help, a quiet sense of peace settled over her. It was as if, in some small way, she was restoring balance for a debt she hadn't even realized she'd felt. One gray morning, Eric was roused from his usual spot by a city employee delivering an envelope. The official handed it to him with a nod before disappearing into the crowd. Intrigued, Eric opened the envelope and found a slip of paper announcing that he'd been approved for a small subsidized apartment. An anonymous donor had covered the initial costs to get him off the streets. For the first time in years, Eric felt hope stir within him. Stunned and moved beyond words, he clutched the letter, reading it over and over. He didn't know who had done this, but he knew it was someone who believed he deserved a chance, and for the first time in a long time, he did too. The weeks following Eric's move into the small apartment felt like a blur. Each day, he wandered through the modest space, still in disbelief that he had walls around him, warmth, and a place to sleep without fear of being moved along by the police. The room was simple, but to him, it felt like a palace. However, curiosity soon gnawed at him. Who had done this for him? He couldn't shake the thought that someone had gone out of their way to make this happen. One rainy afternoon, he walked to the cafe where he had first met Sarah. He wasn't even sure why he was there, but something in his gut told him he might find answers. As he stepped inside, he immediately noticed Sarah sitting by the window, a coffee cup in her hands, gazing out at the rain. Their eyes met, and she seemed as surprised as he was. After a moment, she waved him over, her expression caught between warmth and a hint of guilt. Eric approached cautiously and sat down across from her. "Eric, it's good to see you," she said softly, setting her cup down. "Sarah," he began, his voice rough, filled with both gratitude and confusion. I don't know how to thank you. I kept getting these packages, and then the apartment, it's more than I ever imagined." She nodded slowly, her expression softening. "You don't need to thank me, Eric. You did something for me when you returned that wallet. You went out of your way when you could have walked off with it. It reminded me of something I'd lost, my faith in people." She smiled, almost self-conscious. "You gave me that back." For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of her words settling over them. Then she added, "I wanted to help because everyone deserves a second chance. You've already shown more integrity than most people I know." Eric's eyes shimmered as he absorbed her words, realizing that her kindness had gone beyond mere charity. She had seen him as someone worth helping, worth trusting. "You've changed my life, Sarah," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I didn't think anyone saw me that way anymore." A small tear escaped down Sarah's cheek as she reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Sometimes, Eric, all it takes is one small act of kindness to change everything," she said, her voice warm and certain. For the first time in years, Eric felt whole again, a glimmer of hope lighting a path forward. Sarah had given him more than an apartment or a meal. She had restored his faith in himself and in the world. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. Thank you for watching.